The last light in the room was not from a lamp, but from the television screen, its electronic glow casting long shadows that crept across the floor as the final credits rolled. It was 2016 in the unassuming town of Spalding, a place where midnight usually meant nothing more philosophical than a forgotten streetlight. A young couple, comfortable in their shared solitude, had passed the late hours watching a film, Twilight, that modern saga of brooding fantasy love. The movie ended, the room slipped into a deeper dark, and drowsiness, heavy and inviting, pulled them under. Outside, an April night held the world in a damp, chilly grip. That boy and that girl would not emerge from that house for 2 full days. Their presence within those walls would become a passive, terrible fact, as a new and foul odor began to permeate the air, a smell not of simple decay, but of a secret violently unmade. It thickened, this scent, it insisted, until neighbors could no longer explain it away, until it finally compelled the police to call. What awaited them behind the door was not a disorderly household, but a tableau of such visceral horror it would etch itself permanently into their minds. And when officers, struggling to make sense of the stillness, asked the teenage boy what had transpired, his answer was a flat, eerie challenge. Why don't you go and look? A word of introduction is necessary before we begin. This is Old Scourge. This channel is devoted to the incidents that track the heart of true human darkness. If such explorations hold a fascination for you, consider subscribing. A new story arrives every couple of days. Okay, now let's us go and look at the incident. Spalding rests in the flat, fertile expanse of eastern England, a picture of rural calm. Some 36,000 souls inhabit its streets, a community built around winding canals, meticulously kept gardens, and a bustling weekly market. Its lifeblood is agriculture, a rhythm of planting and harvest that brings transient workers through its midst. This is a town with a low crime rate, a place of apparent safety and quiet routine. It is, by all accounts, an ideal place to raise a family. That was the dream, at least. 2 families, the Edwards and the Markhams, had clung to that very dream. Their success in achieving it would soon become a matter of public and painful scrutiny. We begin with Elizabeth Edwards. She was 49, and to everyone she was simply Liz. A transplant from Edinburgh, Scotland, she had come to Spalding with her 3 daughters, Mary, 27, and stepping into her own life, Kim, 14, and Katie, 13. By day, Liz worked as a dinner lady in the canteen of St. Paul's Primary School, her face a familiar and friendly sight to children and parents alike. Her spirit was woven into the town's fabric. She volunteered at the local theater, sorted clothes in a charity shop, and helped direct the children's church choir. Hers was a life of small, dedicated services. Her youngest, Katie, was her constant companion, a smiling shadow in this busy, reconstructed life. This image of resilience, however, was a fortress built upon ruins. Liz's past was a locked room containing a storm. She had been married to Peter Edwards, the father of Kim and Katie. He was not a hard man in any admirable sense. Police records would later strip him of any mystery, labeling him an abusive drug addict. The Edwards' former home had been a theater of domestic violence, a place of fear, not of comfort. In 2004, Liz had finally gathered her daughters and fled, moving from a temporary refuge to a women's shelter in a desperate, nomadic escape from Peter's shadow. Spalding represented the end of that flight, a promised land of peace. With Mary grown, it was Liz, Kim, and Katie who settled into the rhythm of this new town, the girls in school, Liz working among children. In this charming place with its gentle reputation, things finally seemed great. They seemed stable. They seemed, against all past odds, secure. In 2008, when Kim, the middle daughter, was just 6 years old, a simple argument over a television program escalated into something dark and familiar. The violence Liz had spent years fleeing did not vanish. It had merely changed address, taking up residence inside her own exhausted hands. In a moment of furious frustration, she struck her young daughter. This was not a fleeting lapse, but a terrifying echo. To her credit, Liz recognized the ghost that had possessed her. Having lived for so long as a target, she now saw herself becoming the source. She was the one who made the call to social services, an act of remorse that still resulted in Kim and Katie being taken into foster care for several months. When the girls returned, the household atmosphere was not one of healing, but of a quiet, corrosive tension. Kim, in particular, carried a deep-seated conviction that she was loved less than her sisters, Mary and Katie. In confidential sessions with a caseworker, she spoke of an intense loneliness, a feeling of abandonment within her own home. She once described an incident where her mother had tried to strangle her, a claim Liz vehemently denied. The truth of that specific event remained locked between them, but the larger truth of Kim's isolation was undeniable. She grew into a deeply depressed teenager, describing her existence as a pit from which she could see no escape. A teacher, noticing the girl's profound withdrawal, referred her to a mental health service. The official assessment, however, was a grotesque miscalculation. They rated her concern level a 2 out of 10. Anyone who looked closely could see she was an 11. It was from within this private darkness that Kim eventually glimpsed a light, or what she mistook for one. Her salvation appeared in the form of a boy named Lucas Markham. Their connection would later be framed by outsiders as a Shakespearean tragedy of star-crossed lovers, a superficial label for something far more elemental. They met in September 2013 at Spalding Academy. It was not a gentle meeting. Lucas announced himself by hurling a chair across a classroom. Where others saw a problem, Kim saw a kind of brutal authenticity. She found this raw outburst of energy compelling, even admirable. A crush simmered, and by 2015, as they queued outside classrooms, it blossomed into a tentative connection. Texts were exchanged, a relationship formed. They were 13, then 14. On the surface, Kim seemed transformed, happier, more social, wrapped in the thrilling drama of a first love. She was popular, funny, a girl who went shopping with friends, performing the normalcy she craved. Lucas, however, was cut from a different cloth. His exterior was not happy-go-lucky, but guarded and abrasive, described by many as a bully and a loner. The chair throwing was not an isolated performance. His own history was a mirror to Kim's, a saga of domestic violence and institutional shuffling. His mother had died of leukemia when he was 4. His father was a heavy drinker prone to using his hands. Lucas had moved through a series of foster homes before landing with an aunt in Spalding. Their bond, therefore, was not a meeting of opposites, but recognition of shared damage. Their infatuation played out in the digital language of their generation, a stream of Facebook comments filled with exaggerated affection and endless similes. To the outside world, they were a mismatch. But in their private orbit, they had found someone who spoke the same silent, rough language of a fractured childhood. They were not a cute school romance, but two young souls building a fort from the same broken bricks. Liz Edwards, for all her hopes of a fresh start, saw in Lucas Markham not a troubled boy, but a chilling reflection of the man she had escaped. Her disapproval of the relationship was not about petty teenage rebellion, but about a deep, visceral recognition. She heard echoes of Peter in Lucas's temperament, saw the same potential for storm clouds in his eyes. She was determined to break them apart. Even Kim's friends, while glad to see her outwardly happier, grew quietly alarmed. Kim would occasionally appear with unexplained bruises, a shadow around an eye, a grip mark on a wrist, and the digital trail between the couple told a darker story. Messages from Lucas laced with vicious insults, a torrent of names meant to degrade and control. Yet Kim, every time, would defend him. Her loyalty was not love, but a fortress she had built around the only person she believed understood her world. In 2016, the tension snapped. The pair ran away together, a desperate adolescent bid for freedom with bicycles, a tent, and stolen groceries. A large-scale search ensued, police were involved, and the town's quiet was shattered by the fear for 2 missing children. When they were found, Liz laid down the law. Kim was grounded, and contact with Lucas was forbidden. This was not a solution, but a catalyst. To tell 2 isolated, bonded teenagers they could not be together was to pour gasoline on a smoldering fire. It welded them closer. 3 months later, in the spring of that fateful year, the situation curdled. Lucas was suspended from school, his behavior escalating beyond simple disruption into something truly alarming, landing him in a special unit for uncontrollable students. Kim, meanwhile, presented a face of brittle normalcy to the world, but in her mandated sessions with social workers and psychologists, she confessed to a depression deeper than ever before. She revealed a prior overdose, a silent cry for help that had landed her in a hospital. The foundation was crumbling. Then in April, a ghost returned. Peter Edwards, Kim's father, the abusive drug addict, reappeared, wanting to reconnect with his daughters. Liz, who had crossed a country to flee him, was adamantly against it. This sparked a furious argument between mother and daughter. Kim, craving any connection to a paternal figure, however flawed, wanted to see him. Harsh words were exchanged, words that could not be taken back. Kim fled, finding refuge only in Lucas's house. There, the 2 teenagers barricaded themselves in his bedroom, a united front against the world, and had to be physically removed by adults. That evening, after returning to their separate homes, they each discovered a final, devastating rejection. Their families had stripped their bedrooms, not as punishment, but as eradication. Every poster, every piece of clothing, every token of identity was gone. Only a bare mattress remained in each empty room. This was not a disciplinary action, but a symbolic annihilation. They were 14 years old, and the last fragile threads tying them to their families had been severed. It was this act of absolute dismissal that became the turning point. The plan they began to formulate in the following days was not a fantasy, but a cold, detailed blueprint. For nearly a week, they met each night at the local McDonald's. Sitting under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by the smell of frying oil and the sounds of other children's laughter, they quietly plotted murder. Over happy meals, they decided the order. First Liz, then Katie, then themselves. The date was set for Wednesday, April 13th. The Edwards lived in a semi-detached house on Dawson Avenue, a quiet cul-de-sac. But by April 15th, that house had fallen into an unnatural quiet. It held only Kim, Lucas, and the flickering television. The knocks that came to the front door that day were not a surprise, but an interruption. The silence inside had already grown too thick, and the smell had already begun to tell a story no one wanted to hear. The silence from the house on Dawson Avenue had become a tangible thing, a pressure that finally forced action. It was not just the school that noted the absence. Liz had not shown up for her job at the primary school, and neither Kim nor Katie had appeared for their classes. Liz had been seeing a new man, a trucker named Graham who lived a town over. When his calls and texts went unanswered for days, a low hum of worry turned into a genuine alarm. He was the one who prompted the police to perform a welfare check. Officers first called on April 14th, circling the property 3 separate times, receiving no answer. They returned on the morning of the 15th, their knocks again meeting that solid, unbroken quiet. This time, however, they heard the frantic scratching and whining of a dog trapped inside. The mood shifted instantly from routine check to urgent intervention. They forced the door, hoping to find a simple misunderstanding, a family who had left town without telling anyone. What they found was not an absence, but a presence, a terrible one. In the living room, a mattress lay on the floor, the television flickering with silent, garish light. Upon it, under a duvet, were Lucas and Kim. The scene was one of bizarre, static indolence. When the officers asked what was happening, Lucas did not offer an excuse or a story. He looked directly at them and uttered the phrase that would forever haunt the case. "Why don't you go and look?" They did. They moved into the hallway, where a thickening, metallic smell began to coat the air. They climbed the stairs, the odor deepening with each step. On the landing, it was a physical wall. The door to the master bedroom was closed. Inside, in the gloom, lay Liz Edwards. She was on her bed, not resting, but displayed in a state of horrific violence, completely saturated in blood. A pillow had been placed over her face. She had been stabbed 8 times, her jugular savagely opened. In the next bedroom, they found 13-year-old Katie in a similar state, a pillow over her head, stabbed twice. On the floor beside her lay a single kitchen knife, gleaming wetly under the police torchlight. The scene was not one of passion, but of a methodical, almost ceremonial execution. What transpired was this. Late on the night of April 13th, while Liz and Katie slept, Lucas walked the alley behind the house. He scaled a fence, climbed onto a 1-story extension, and tapped 3 times on the upstairs bathroom window, a prearranged signal. Kim let him in. On his back was a rucksack containing 4 kitchen knives, 2 for each intended victim. The plan was precise. Lucas would kill Liz and Kim would kill her own sister, Katie. Lucas entered the dark master bedroom. He knelt beside the sleeping woman, aiming his first strike not for her heart, but for her throat, intending to destroy her voice box to prevent a scream. He missed. What followed was not a quick, silent kill, but a desperate, brutal struggle. Liz fought fiercely, her arms crisscrossed with defensive wounds as she tried to ward off the blade. To muffle her cries, Lucas pressed a pillow over her face, stabbing relentlessly until her movements ceased. She was left on her side, a gaping wound at her neck, the room a testament to a long and intimate struggle. Down the hall, in the echoing quiet after her mother's murder, Kim Edwards then entered her sister's room to fulfill her part of the pact. The confession, when it came, was delivered in a flat, matter-of-fact tone that was more disturbing than any outburst of rage. Kim described hearing noises from her mother's room, a struggle, muffled sounds. She went to check. She saw Lucas on top of her mother, his weight pinning her down, a pillow pressed hard over her face. She thought she heard the words, "Get off me," but she could not be sure. For 10 minutes, she watched as he labored to end a life. When he emerged, he was drenched in blood. He looked at her and said simply, "Well, Kim, you're up." She could not do it. The resolve that had solidified over happy meals evaporated in the face of the actual, breathing reality of her younger sister. A panic attack seized her, buckling her knees. She retreated to the bathroom, curling into a fetal position on the cold floor. So Lucas, having completed the first act alone, moved to the second. He entered Katie's bedroom. He stabbed the sleeping girl in the neck and smothered her face with another pillow. Afterwards, they closed the bedroom doors, as if shutting the lid on a terrible box. They ran a bath together, washing the blood from their skin in water turned pink. They dragged a mattress downstairs into the living room. They selected the Twilight films from the shelf and played them, one after another. They raided the kitchen, drinking alcohol they found, eating ice cream and tea cakes. For 36 hours, they existed in this suspended, mundane bubble of films and sugar, while the bodies of Liz and Katie grew cold in the rooms above. This was not a frenzied aftermath, but a numb and eerie intermission, broken only when the police finally broke through the door. In the interviews that followed, the question was inevitable. What reason could justify such a drastic, horrific plan? Kim's answer was not a scream of hatred, but a quiet explanation of twisted relief. She spoke of a lifetime believing her mother favored her sisters, a conviction that no amount of reassurance could ever dislodge. She described the act itself with a chilling serenity. It was okay. It happened so quickly. It gave me peace of mind. It wasn't like torture. She framed the murders as a perverse gift, a solution to her own suffering. Her mother would no longer have to worry about a suicidal daughter. Her sister would be spared future heartbreak. The final, agreed-upon steps of their pact, their own suicides, were abandoned almost immediately. Seeing what they had done to Liz and to Katie, they lost the stomach for turning the violence inward. They chose, instead, to live with what they had wrought. Lucas would plead guilty to 2 counts of murder. Kim pleaded guilty to manslaughter, her lawyers successfully arguing that mental illness had diminished her responsibility. They were, and remain, the youngest couple ever convicted of murder in Britain. Each was ordered to serve a minimum of 17.5 years, a substantial portion of a life, handed over before adulthood had even begun. In the aftermath, Kim would reiterate her warped rationale. She was glad her mother and sister no longer had to worry about her. It is a statement that echoes the hollow logic found in other cases of reflective juvenile detachment, a scary attitude, as you say, that seems to bypass regret entirely. They exhibited not 1 ounce of genuine remorse for the lives taken, only a cold satisfaction that their personal turmoil had been, in their minds, resolved. This leaves us with the gravest and most uncomfortable question. These were children failed by a cascade of systems, by fractured families, by overlooked cries for help, by social care that judged a girl's despair 2 out of 10. Stupidity in youth is one thing. It is crossing a road without looking. This was something else entirely, a premeditated, brutal annihilation of family, followed by 2 days of mundane leisure. If someone that young can commit an act that horrific and feel nothing but a twisted sense of peace, is there any way back? They are young. They have technically a long life ahead, but the path from where they are to anything resembling a redeemed life is not a road, it is a cliff face, and some falls are so deep, the bottom never comes into view. The answer to that final, hollow question now belongs not to us, but to the slow-turning wheels of time itself. We will see. In a decade or more, when the machinery of justice considers their minimum term served, the world will be presented with 2 adults who entered a system as children, their souls permanently stained by an act of almost unimaginable domestic annihilation. What emerges from behind those walls will be a matter for psychologists, for parole boards, and for a society that must decide what to do with the irreversible. Thank you for accompanying me through this bleak corridor of human darkness. Your attention, your willingness to look unflinchingly at these difficult stories, is what allows this exploration to continue. It means a great deal. Most importantly, as we step away from this story and back into the light of our own lives, please remember to be kind. Take care of each other and take care of yourselves and people around you. The world needs more of that. As always, this is where I say goodbye and good night.